This evening, Books and Books is honored to welcome Professor Elizabeth Alexander, presenting her new memoir, The Light of the World. And here to introduce Professor Alexander, we're also very happy to be welcoming a good friend of Books and Books, Professor Campbell McGrath.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here, especially because it's such a treat to introduce a true old friend in Elizabeth Alexander, who is one of America's most renowned poets, as we all know. She's published, depending how you count, at least 6 collections of poetry, including Crave Radiance, her new and selected poems published by Grey Wolf in 2010. She's also authored 2 books of essays, a play. She's edited critical editions of poets and other works, and now, of course, The Light of the World, from which we'll hear later. She has won a basket full, or perhaps I should say a shelf full, of awards and distinctions, including a Guggenheim Fellowship and the Jackson Prize for Poetry. Her book, American Sublime, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 2005. She's been a distinguished teacher in many institutions for a lot of years, the last 15 or so at Yale, where she's the Thomas E. Donnelly Professor of African American Studies and the past chair of that department. As a poet, Elizabeth's subjects range across a wide swath of human experience, from the deeply personal to the grandly historic. She writes about art and music, culture and tradition, motherhood, daughterhood, personhood, about what it means to be Black in America, to be a woman in America, what it means at an existential level to be American. Her work explores the shifting mosaic of race and identity over time through historical characters as well, ranging from Muhammad Ali to the survivors of the Amistad slave revolt. History, as Alexander sees it, is not an abstract or static state. It is a living medium in which we grow, like penicillin in a petri dish, like Spanish moss in a live oak tree. We are part of history. Our lives comprise the text of the future. If anything proves this point, it is surely the moment at which Elizabeth stood on the Capitol steps and read her poem, Praise Song for the Day, at the 2009 inauguration of Barack Obama. Here, indeed, was history being enacted, personal and social, cultural and political, and a marvelous poem of praise to honor the moment. Praise may lie at the heart of Elizabeth's work, but tonight, sadly, sorrow will play its part. When tragedy entered Elizabeth's life 3 years ago, with the shocking death of her husband, she responded with the tools of her trade. She wrote a book. Not poetry this time, but a memoir, The Light of the World. And you can hardly pick up a newspaper or journal these days without reading a glowing review of it. When Joyce Carol Oates says that your book is one of the most compelling memoirs of loss that I have ever read, you know you have done something remarkable. I could read a dozen more such testimonials, but I've taken up too much time already. So please help me welcome Elizabeth Alexander.
Yes. Thank you, Campbell. Oldest of old friends. We went from 8th grade to 12th grade together, so yes. And thank you everyone else for coming, those who I do know and those who I don't know. I look forward to having a conversation with you after I read. So this is a memoir, and I think of it as a poet's memoir in that I wrote it in the only way I knew how, word by word, sound by sound, image by image, building small chapters that are not prose poems, not poetic prose, but a poet's prose is the only way I know how to think about them. So the book is in many small sections. Time moves around as time does. Memory moves around as memory does. And so that is how the reading will be comprised. The story seems to begin with catastrophe, but in fact began earlier and is not a tragedy, but rather a love story. Perhaps tragedies are only tragedies in the presence of love, which confers meaning to loss. Loss is not felt in the absence of love. The queen died and then the king died is a plot, wrote E.M. Forster in The Art of the Novel. But the queen died and then the king died of grief is a story. It begins on a beautiful April morning when a man wakes exhausted and returns to sleep in his beloved 13-year-old son's trundle bed, declaring, "This is the most comfortable bed I have ever slept in." Or it begins when the wife says goodbye to the man a few hours later, walking in front of his car, switching her hips a bit, a blown kiss as she heads to her office and he continues on to his painting studio. Or the story begins as he packs a tote bag with the usual slim thermos of strong coffee made in an Italian stovetop mocha pot. The tote is astral blue and printed with Giotto angels. Off to his studio for a day of painting, then home, as if nothing extraordinary has happened when in fact he has been envisioning worlds. Hanging the Giotto bag on a hook in the mudroom and changing out of his paint-splattered jeans into gym shorts and a t-shirt for yoga in the family room or a run on the treadmill in the basement. Soon the two children will walk down Edge Hill Road from the bus stop like burros under their knapsack, and his wife will prepare dinner while listening to Thelonious Monk's evocative open intervals and sipping from a glass of white wine that he's opened and poured for her. "My frosty white?" she'd ask a few times a week, and he'd chuckle and say, "Right away, my love, chop chop." They enjoyed playing and acting out boy-girl courtliness. The 13-year-old does his homework and the 12-year-old practices his drumming. The man's home life is the unchanging, beautiful same, so anything could occur in the painting studio each day. I am the wife. I am the wife of 15 years. I am the plumpish wife, the pretty wife, the loving wife, the smart wife, the American wife. I am eternally his wife. Perhaps the story begins with the 36 lottery tickets he bought 2 days before he died, which I discovered weeks later when they fluttered out of the pages of one of the books he was reading. Or it begins with his surprise 50th birthday party 4 days before he died, and the spoken tributes from his loved ones, and strawberries and pancakes and music the next day. Or it began when I met him 16 years before. That was always a good story, an actual coup de foudre, a bolt of lightning, love at first sight. I felt a visceral torque, I would tell people, a literal churn of my organs, not butterflies, not arousal, rather a not unpleasant rotation of my innards as never before. Lightning struck and did not curdle the cream, but instead turned it to sweet, silken butter. Lightning turned sand into glass. The story began in the winter of 1961 when two quietly mighty women were each pregnant, one in Asmara, Eritrea, and the other in Harlem, USA, one with her 6th child, one with her 1st. The East African sun would arrive on March 21st, 1962, the most hallowed day of the zodiac. It is the beginning and the end of the astrological calendar, and so it is said that children born on March 21st are ancient souls who possess the wonder and innocence of newborns. The American child, a girl, would come on May 30th into the chatter and buzz of Gemini in Gotham. Henry Ford believed the soul of a person is located in their last breath, and so captured the last breath of his best friend, Thomas Edison, in a test tube and kept it evermore. It is on display at the Henry Ford Museum outside Detroit, like Galileo's finger in the Church of Santa Croce. But Edison's last breath is an invisible relic. Ficre breathed his last breath into me when I opened his mouth and breathed everything I had into him. He felt like a living person then. I am certain his soul was there. And then in the ambulance, riding the long ride down to the hospital, even as they worked and worked, the first icy wind blew into me. He was going or gone. I need to call somebody, don't I? I asked the ambulance driver, a woman. Yes, you do, she said. You tell the story. No, you tell the story. I had just recovered from a rather significant romantic misstep and had fled from Chicago to New Haven to Yale at the invitation of my director friend Leah to write a play. I hoped new work would heal me. A friend took me to see Reggie the Psychic of Brooklyn, New York. You better get yourself together, girl, Reggie said, because your man is on his way and you can't stop this love from coming. This is no regular Negro, Reggie said. He's from someplace tiny that no one's ever heard of. I see you in a kitchen picking up a conversation where you left off, even though you just met each other. He's a painter, said Reggie. The paintings are big and the colors look like sunset, like the American Southwest. I want one. And here comes the baby, Reggie said. It's a boy, and he's coming sooner than you think. And by the way, you want to be a playwright? Guess who you're going to meet tomorrow? Mr. George C. Wolfe. Pish tosh, I thought, and then went on about my business. Reggie the Psychic. A few weeks later, I was sitting in a cafe in New Haven, drinking my orange pineapple smoothie and minding my own business. I was to meet an old friend. Strangely, she never arrived. Excuse me, he said. Like so many songs go, I looked up from my book, and thus we proceeded to talk. I loved that she was an artist. I loved that she was a teacher. I loved that she had short hair. A torque inside my stomach, the science of love. I was headed back to Chicago that week and so wrote down for him 517 West Roscoe Street, Chicago, Illinois, 60615, and then last minute my local telephone number for the next few days. The phone was ringing when I went back to my campus apartment. Would you like to come by for coffee tomorrow? And I said yes. And he said, call me when you set out walking and I will wait for you. There he stood on the corner of George and State Streets, waiting for me, smiling. I went for coffee and I never left. And did I remember to say, the day after speaking to Reggie, I met the great George C. Wolfe at the theater in New Haven, totally by chance. Ficre thought Solo and Simon each should have a special ritual for his 13th birthday, and so he asked them to imagine a journey they'd like the family to take with them. I want to take the Orient Express from Paris to Istanbul, said Simon the younger, and so that trip became part of the family anticipatory fantasy, despite the fact that we weren't even sure if the Orient Express still ran. After characteristic deliberation, Solo declared that he wanted us to drive cross-country. We planned and planned for 2 years leading up to the summer of 2011 when Solo would turn 13. We worked and organized, and then the June day came. We rented a car, the Crown Vic, in Stamford, our mighty chariot for the journey. Single-pump gas stations in the South, Peaches, every civil rights stop we could make, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, 16th Street Baptist Church, the Lorraine Motel, George Washington Carver's Preserved Laboratory at Tuskegee, my grandparents' birthplaces in Alabama, my great-grandparents' gravestones there. The Navajo Rodeo, Navajo Anthem, Navajo Flag, Navajo Land, Navajo Speeding Ticket, which Ficre prized. We were too tired to stop at the Grand Canyon. The rainstorm in Mississippi as we drove to Memphis where it rained horizontally and Ficre piloted us through. To our children's vast amusement, we both rode the water slide at the Broadmoor in Colorado, the fancy hotel where I insisted we stay so that I could revitalize myself. I had a gig in beloved Chicago, and the boys went to a White Sox game on the L while I read my poems. We met friends. Kevin made us eat bacon dipped in peanut butter, and Jennifer fried pickles. The Watts Tower, my holy place. Hilarious Vegas, where we had lunch with a play uncle who is a singer there, and he met my children for the very first time. I argued like a grifter for a better hotel room in Santa Monica, and we lived in the very lap of luxury. The day in Santa Monica when we rented bikes and rode to Venice Beach in the sunshine. We zoomed on our separate bikes together, stopped to go to an actual freak show where a bearded woman greeted us at the door, a man lay down on a bed of broken glass, and the children were growing and happy and free, and we were using our bodies, and the ocean was beside us, and later we would eat fish tacos and watch people dance to disco music and roller skate, and then a drumming circle of 100 played on the beach as the sun set. This was the most perfect 4 hours of happiness in my life. Our culminating stop was Oakland, where we visited his eldest sister. When we got there, the idyll halted when we learned that she had an advanced cancer. Ficre and I took it on like we always did, finding the very best doctors, contacting NIH about experimental protocols, reading and deciphering pathology reports, talking with her children. That was what we did. In many cultures and religions, they warn you about looking too hard at one thing because something can happen behind your back. West Indians give their children nicknames so the angel of death will not find them. He only knows to look for them by their proper names. When Solo was born, an Egyptian friend gave us an evil eye and told us to pin it in his stroller blankets. And indeed, I am glad it is there when people reach in to touch the exquisite child. We got another evil eye and put it at the front of the house, along with a Chinese red rooster in the kitchen, everything but a mezuzah. I believe in all the charms and superstitions I did not grow up with, the beautiful objects that keep a family safe. We light candles for Tadu with one hand and call NIH with the other. She makes plans to travel to Lourdes. Miraculously, her cancer will retreat. No one can understand it. Fikre is not here to tell me what kind of trees my parents are, but I know they are mighty trees. They do not yield to the wind. They go straight up, unbending. Redwood seems too regionally imprecise. We are definitely not Westerners. I think of my parents as having many colors ranging from the new greens of spring to autumn golds, but they have the constancy of perennials, all shelter and trunk to lean on. My parents stand like trees and survey everything. I am always their child, and yet it is not as when I was a child, because I am also mother to Solomon and Simon, for whom I must be a tree. Fikre planted trees for me that were lush and romantic. Magnolia, Japanese maple, for those were the years of amorous love and its fulsome expressions which sustain us through the winter months of marriage. Now I need to be, like my parents, the 100-year-old oak in our backyard that lives even after hammocks and tire swings have been nailed in and taken down, and after the southern Connecticut tornado of 1989 destroyed wide swaths of Hamden as the wind tore down the streets, uprooting trees. Our 100-year-old tree stood as my parents stand, as they saw elders stand, as ancestors stood. During the funeral and the months after, they come back and forth from Washington. My mother roasts chickens and sets tables, and my father gets in the car and buys groceries and non-essential electronic appliances. Never once do they allow their grief to supersede even a corner of our home, and yet it comes over me like another enormous dark cloud. They have lost a son. They have lost a son. They do not cry in front of me until I am much, much stronger. Then it is first my father who weeps. To be a parent is to be terra firma. To stand is to be planted in the earth. Fikre was supposed to be an elder, but his days were not long. He who believed in the lottery. He who did not leave a large carbon footprint. He who never met a child he didn't enchant. He who loved to wear the color pink. He whose children made him laugh until he cried. He who never told a lie. He who majored in physics, who knew the laws of the universe. He who wanted to win the lottery for me. May ends with my 50th birthday. I'd wanted to have a joint birthday party with Fikre, a 100th birthday party. In our New Haven neighborhood filled with old houses and intellectuals, people sometimes have 100th birthday parties for their houses, which feels very New England to me in a way that we are not. But the idea of our being 100 together was magic. I refuse to have my birthday. I'll sit this one out, I repeat. But Joanne insists you have to have a birthday, and she and Amy make a small party for me where we feast in their home, with our children, with my parents, with my brother, with Alondra, dance hard to the hip-hop songs the kids DJ, and then listen to a live chanteuse sing songs that make all the grown-ups cry. Joanne is right. You cannot stop your birthday from coming, so you might as well celebrate being alive. I did not grow up in the black church, nor with the Negro spirituals. Now I understand them as never before. Their poetry feels pure and profound. I've been in sorrow's kitchen and done licked out all the pots. Nobody knows the trouble I seen. Steal away to Jesus, I ain't got long to stay here. I think of Frederick Douglass's great words that I have taught countless times. I did not, when a slave, fully understand the deep meaning of those rude and apparently incoherent songs. The remark in olden times was not infrequently made that slaves were most contented and happy laborers in the world, and their dancing and singing were referred to in proof of this alleged fact. But it was a great mistake to suppose them happy, because they sometimes made those joyful noises. The songs of the slaves represented their sorrows rather than their joys. Like tears, they were a relief to aching hearts. Slaves sing most when they are most unhappy, he famously wrote. Song raises and bubbles up as the only apt expression of this sorrow, the only possible bulwark against eclipsing grief. I have not dreamed enough of Ficre because my subconscious is vigilant. I hope no one is fooled by my competence. The waters of sorrow continue to wash and wash. The few safe zones are clear as if infrared. Outside of those zones, there is free fall. The children are obsessed with stories in the sensationalist press of the coming zombie apocalypse and flesh-eating creatures arisen from the dead. I brush it off, but their beliefs persist. My 50th birthday and flowers keep coming, cards, celebration, and love. One of us is still here. You were supposed to be 100 together, my mother says. We loved Jimmy Scott's version of the David Byrne song Heaven. Heaven is a place where nothing ever happens. These days, I picture heaven populated by the umber angels Ficre painted in abundance, but that seems too fanciful. I never truly believed in heaven and cannot manufacture it. Little Jimmy Scott's plaintiveness seems right when he sings, "Nothing ever happens." How better to describe the infinite solitude of the afterlife? When this kiss is over, it will start again. It will not be any different. It will be exactly the same, he sings. Each kiss is fixed. It is the same long kiss, but it will never change. That is the comfort, and that is the heartbreak. One night at bedtime, Simon asks if I want to come with him to visit Ficre in heaven. Yes, I say, and lie down on his bed. First you close your eyes, he says, and ride the clear glass elevator. Up we go. What do you see? I ask. God is sitting at the gate, he answers. What does God look like? I ask. Like God, Mommy, he says. Now we go to where Daddy is. He has 2 rooms, Simon says, one room with a single bed and his books and another where he paints. The painting room is vast. He can look out any window he wants and paint. That room has 4 views, our backyard, the dock he painted in Maine, Asmara, and New Mexico. New Mexico, I ask. Yes, Simon says, the volcano crater with the magic grass. Ah, yes, I say, the caldera, where we saw the gophers and the jackrabbits and the elk running across, and Daddy called it the veldt. Yes. Do you see it? And I do. The light is perfect for painting. His bed in heaven is a single bed. Okay, it's time to go now, Simon says, so down we go. You can come with me any time, he says. Thank you, my darling. I don't think you can find it by yourself yet, he says, but one day you will. Last night, I went into a bookstore for the first time since Ficre died. Ah, I thought, I have been avoiding this, for he is the ghost of all bookstores. He is in the history section, or the art section, or the gardening section, reading books and piling them up. He would gather books for the children's library, more books than they could ever read, more books than I thought would interest them, and we would fuss about it. I'd suggest taking a few off the pile. He'd say, that makes the whole design fall apart. I'd say, where will we put them? He'd say, we'll get a bigger house, and then we'd laugh. My darling, you are not in this bookstore. Carrying home a bag of books, I think of all the books I will never know about because you will not show them to me. I think of the loss of knowledge, all the things I will never know because you are not here to tell me. I cannot ask questions. I cannot be reminded. I can no longer say, though I still do to the children, that's a daddy question, when they ask about the Peloponnesian War, or the Khmer Rouge, or Latin declension, or the quadratic formula, or how sinkholes are formed on limestone beds. You of all knowledge, you of all curiosity, God of books and deep knowledge, enemy of facile pronouncements, Fikre Gebreyesus, ghost of all bookstores. I come out of my first Pilates class exhilarated, blood flowing, stretched and tall. It is the first time in ages I lose myself and forget. My tears come fast and sting just after I think I cannot wait to get to the phone to call Fikre and tell him. Rilke surprises me how true and contemporary he feels in the Book of Hours, poems which he wrote as received spiritual messages or prayers. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Don't let yourself lose me. Nearby is the country they call life. You will know it by its seriousness. Give me your hand. For Rilke, God is the companion, the hand the reader is exhorted to take. Fikre is not my God, neither do I know who God is, but I find this force in art, poems, and the community I have made. When we met those many years ago, I let everything happen to me, and it was beauty. Along the road, more beauty and fear and struggle and work and learning and joy. I could not have kept Fikre's death from happening and from happening to us. It happened. It is part of who we are. It is our beauty and our terror. We must be gleaners from what life has set before us. If no feeling is final, there is more for me to feel. I dream we are moving, my family of 4, Lizzie, Fikre, Solomon, and Simon. It is light and easy. We laugh with the boys as we sort through and throw things away. Fikre carries and moves large bags and objects, the African ox, sturdy and purposeful. The boys move as oxen as well. We are glad to be going wherever we are going. Then the children evaporate from the dreamscape, and it is just the 2 of us walking a long, gently curved road, holding hands. At a fork in the road, Fikre lets my hand go and waves me on. You have to keep walking, Lizzie, he says. I know it is the only truth, so I walk. I look back, I look back. I can still see him, smiling and waving me on. It was the 2 of us walking the road, and now he has let my hand go. I walk. I can always see him. His size does not change as I move forward. He is 5'9.5", exactly right. I can still feel the feel of my hand in his hand as I walk. I wake, and the room is flooded with pale yellow light. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So now I'm eager for your questions and comments. Yes.
One of Fikre's paintings.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. I was very, very happy. So he had 3 whole lifetimes of work. One lifetime as an activist on behalf of Eritrean causes. He left as a refugee during the long, long Civil War and did that work along with washing dishes at many different restaurants when he came to the United States via Sudan and Germany and Italy. The next life was as a chef and restaurateur, and the next life was as a painter. He left 882 paintings behind, astonishing, beautiful, gorgeous paintings. And so when my publishers, Grand Central, said that they wanted one on the cover, I was obviously very, very happy. This painting is called Solitary Boat in red and blue. And I chose it because I think it's both beautiful, you're drawn in by the color, you're drawn in by the energy of it, and there's also something very sad and haunting about it. Maybe it's alone but not lonely, but the solitary seems such a carefully chosen word. What is the passage of this unpeopled boat? Is it from one part of the world to another? His was a life of many journeys. Is it from this life to the next? He painted it not long after his very, very beloved mother died. These flowers or stars that improbably rain onto the boat are a touch of magic, which is in his work and was in the way he lived every day. He was absolutely a magical realist in the day-to-day. So, Solitary Boat in Red and Blue. Thanks for asking. Yeah.
Is that psychic still working?
So when I read, I've just started, so this is kind of, I've been doing this for a couple of weeks, and I don't always read about Reggie, though I love to read about Reggie. And if I read about Reggie, invariably someone's like, do you have Reggie's number? And Reggie has retired because he said that those are not powers that you can use forever, because those are very, very serious powers. But that story is 100% true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Have you ever been to Eritrea?
I have not. Eritrea, we tried to go many times in the kind of interstices where things would be quiet for a minute, and then, you know, I'd be having a baby, or then his mother got sick, and then the border skirmish started again, and now, sadly, it's under a very repressive dictatorship. He was very clear that he did not want our children to go there that way. Not only because it's not particularly safe, but also he didn't want them to see where he came from, you know, in that kind of disarray that no one who was a freedom fighter, you know, in which he lost a brother, every family lost someone, nobody would have imagined it would have turned out this way. So, you know, one day. Yes.
How do your sons feel about the book?
Yeah, well, that's very important, because I wouldn't have published the book unless it had their blessing. That said, I think it's important to say I would not change the book because of what they said. I just wouldn't publish the book. So I did need to make very clear to them that there's the kind of what you have to do as a writer and what you have to do as an artist, and that that's actually quite separate from what is a family decision about changing your lives by putting, you know, your life out in the world.
You had to get it down on paper. You had to get it down.
I mean, I knew I couldn't not write, but that's just it's always, to me, a completely separate process from the way that we think about how we would publish something. You know, the writing is just like, it comes out like that, but what you do with it is a whole nother thing. You know, so I thought, okay, well, you know, I can write it and then I can put it away for 20 years, or I can do whatever I might need to do. One day I had been writing, and it was difficult and intense writing, and I would write for a few hours in the morning and then kind of change modes and do other things, so that by the time my kids came home from school, I was happy mom. And one day I just couldn't get there, and they said, what is it? And I said, well, I was writing about Daddy today, and I couldn't do him justice, and that I feel so bad. And Simon, the younger one, said, I'm sure it's better than you think. And then he patted the kitchen table. At the time he was 13, and he said, read it to me. And so I said, and then he called his brother Solo, and then like the next thing I knew, they had snacks, milk, you know, like everything. They were all sort of set up because it was going to be TV time. And I said, well, guys, but Daddy dies in the book. And they looked at me like, we are aware, you know, like that's it. And then they just said, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And I read them 30 pages. And, you know, we cried and we talked, and they remembered things differently, and we talked about that, and then they listened. I mean, many things happened. And then at the end they said, even if we didn't star in it, we think it's a really good book. And I said, so I can keep going? And they said, so you can keep going. And then later on, when it was a full-fledged manuscript, before I gave it to the publisher, I formalized that process. And what was interesting was that I gave it to them. I mean, I said, well, you all want to read it? And they said, no, we want you to read it to us. And so, you know, that was an intense 4 hours, you know, because we sat together and we, again, the same process of reading. And this time we had a very interesting conversation about emotional truth and artistic truth. and about how, you might remember that, the boat was green, or I might remember that it was blue, but that it's not about being right or wrong. It's about, well, what's at the core of what you're trying to describe. And that was, and also with many things, in that way that in a family, you sort of, there's one collective memory, but of course, they have their own memories of their father. I wasn't there all the time. So it was very, very beautiful for me to hear their memories that I didn't know, what was important to them that I didn't know, and to think that that's actually a long process, of how he remains with us in the family.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Could you share about if there was a process of the vulnerability of sharing this with the world and how that impacted you or not?
Yeah. I mean, it's all happening, and it's very, very interesting because, usually when we write poems and you write a book of poems and people come because they like your work or because they like poetry or they're curious, but it's not usually that there's a book of poems with a subject that brings people to come listen to it, and they know that they're coming because there's something about writing that they like. But here there's story that a lot of people connect with, and actually I'm finding it's not just, and actually the minority is people who lose spouses in an untimely way, although that's one thing. But there's love, there's family, there's an immigrant story, there's grieving. There are many, many, many stories in there, and people are meeting the book with their own stories. And I'm finding that whatever vulnerability I might feel is smaller than how enormous and interesting it is to have that kind of meeting. So I'm finding that to be a really, really, really interesting part of the journey. But that said, it's still, yeah. I mean, I'm much more private than this, but here it is. It's a book now. So, but I think that it's just, there's 3 epigraphs that lead to the title, and one of them is from Lucille Clifton, from her poem, The Light That Came to Lucille Clifton. And she says, "The light insists on itself in the world. A voice from the undead past spelled out in my hand, the light insists on itself in the world." And then the poem ends, "You might as well open the door, child. The truth is furiously knocking." And so I feel like there's a way that I just find it very surprising and fascinating that, out of so much sorrow has come something that moves me forward and that allows me to meet other people. So that's worth the vulnerability, I think. Yeah. Yes.
What do you think what do you think your husband would think about what you've written?
Oh, well, that's easy. I mean, he was, well, maybe that's not so easy. He was my very, very profoundest, greatest creative supporter in life. And the last thing he said to me was, "I'll pick up the kids from the orthodontist. You need to go hear the poems, the sacred poets of the Kabbalah. You teach all day, but you never need to forget that you're an artist." And that was the last thing he said to me. And so, no one believed in me more. So I know that the fact that I made art that was in a whole new direction from anything I've done before, that he would feel very proud of that. He was if I was private, he was a private man. He was a quiet man. He was a self-effacing man. He did not like attention to be called to himself. So I think if I had written a book about him and he were still living, he would have said, "Okay, Lizzie, off you go," and he would stay home and not, just like hang out with the kids, because he, even as the great artist that he is, he was not the one to bring it forward. That was not his way. In a very, very beautiful way, actually. So that's your answer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Given that, do you have any plans to ever show his work?
Oh yeah, his that's a whole nother job, and we had a very, very fantastic show of his work in Art Space called Art Space in New Haven did a big show. It's called Polychromasia, a beautiful catalog. Art historians wrote about his work. And there are other, he's going to be in some group shows, and there's galleries who are interested. So that's a bit of a process. And since I already have a bunch of jobs, what will be nice is when that is someone else's job, but it will be. I mean, and it's all been digitized, and there's a website because, he was not someone he was shy about showing it. He didn't want to be the envoy, but he was not someone to hoard any kind of resource. He didn't hoard his love, he didn't hoard his money, he didn't hoard his wisdom, he didn't hoard his knowledge, he didn't hoard his books, he didn't hoard the artwork that he made. He really believed that it needed to radiate out. So luckily there's a little bit of time to do that properly. Yeah.
You still live in New Haven?
No, we moved to New York City, my sons and I, but I still teach in New Haven. Yep. Yep. Yes.
In reflecting and looking at his life, what has that taught you about your own mortality? And he died quite suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel if you died quite suddenly that you would be ready and your family would be ready?
Oh no, I'm going to live forever. And I'm serious. I'm serious. There's one parent left, she's not going anywhere. So I'm just telling you that. I think I have learned a great deal about mortality, but I have become much more of a fabulist about my own mortality, as I have had to. Yeah. Yeah. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Yes.
Were you a fan of the memoir genre? Had you read much?
Yeah, I love memoirs of all kinds. I love the literary ones, and I love the movie star ones. I love life stories. I love them. I gobble them up. When I was writing this, and I had read The Year of Magical Thinking, and I had read, some of the kind of, knew very well a lot of the AIDS memoirs. I had sort of touched on the widow genre before any of this happened. And then when I realized that I was writing a book, I did not want to look at any of those things because I thought, let me not sort of absorb a pattern, or maybe there are widow tropes and I don't want to do that. And also I couldn't for a long time read anything. For months and months and months I couldn't read anything. It's really interesting to be in the memoir genre because it's a whole, like now, just like I am one of those avid readers, there are people who come to story. So it's sort of a new and interesting adventure. I listened to a lot of music when I started writing, and also Rilke, Lucille Clifton, poets who were really, looking at the philosophical, like life, spirit, soul questions. That was what I was able to read. Yeah. Yes.
I'm in bits after listening to you because it was absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
It really was. But at what stage did you start writing?
Yeah,
After he died.
I wrote very soon afterwards, but with no intent of writing a book. But just write, and that was a surprise to me too. Retrospectively, to say like, wow, look, this is what I do. This is how I know what is happening to me. Sometimes people say, was it cathartic? It wasn't catharsis. It wasn't a strict it wasn't about having a feeling. It was about how am I existing? What is happening? Just moving forward, and also being very grounded when I felt like there was no earth underneath me. And really a true story was that I would lie on the ground sometimes, and I would close my eyes and I would say, the earth will hold me to make it true. And that's what kind of writing, felt like, okay, I'm planted somewhere. And then it was a little bit later on, although not too much longer, that my editor, who wasn't my editor, she was sort of a friendly acquaintance. We'd wanted to work together. She approached my agent and said, if it's terrible to ask this, I'll go away, but I wonder if she's writing because I think she could write something extraordinary about what happened. And so she really kind of convinced me that I could do this. I signed a contract thinking, I will give this money right back, you know. But I really did think that because I thought, surely I can't do that. But, you know, I did have my secret, which is that I was writing these little bits. And so I waited a long time to see what they added up to and to see if they were a thing. And then came the kind of much more interesting, because it was less in the muck process of shaping and shaping and shaping and seeing what the whole thing was.
And did your boys help you then? Did they add to it, or was it completely from?
No, I mean, you know, there were a few little nuances, but mostly no. Because also I'm very, I'm sort of not like a take your kids to work person, you know? Like, I kind of feel like I'm the mom, I go to work, I do my work, this is my work, it's good that you know what I do, I'm glad that you think it's interesting, but like, it's my work. And I'm the mother, and so, like, and I go to the grocery store. You know what I'm saying? So I really, and also I really was very keen not for them to feel responsibility, you know, I just didn't want them to feel they had to be in it in any way. But the door was open, you know, for them to be as interested or not interested as they wanted to be. I didn't want them to feel shut out, but I didn't want them to feel an iota of responsibility. And I really wanted them to feel like your mother goes to work and she takes care of business. So you don't have to worry about that, because the kind of, you know, it's a particular kind of worry. Yeah, yes.
So how did you connect up with the spirituals that you referenced?
You know, in Campbell's beautiful introduction, you know, I've always written about art of various kinds. I've always found poetry to be a space where I could meditate on the meaning of paintings or engage with music, or even in the book there's the spirituals, but also there's Little Jimmy Scott. You know, there are lots of different kinds of art forms, really different kinds of art forms that provided a meditative space. And so what I found was interesting in particular about the spirituals was listening anew, listening from a new point in life and thinking, oh, I always enjoyed these, but I didn't understand profoundly what they were for. You know, what they were for in a historically rooted way that was relevant for me today. Does that answer? Yeah. Do you want to ask some more?
Well, it's that you sort of gave the impression that you were not really connected up, let's say, that spirituals permeated your life.
I wasn't raised in the black church.
And so I was just wondering, what was it that connected you with them? How did you, and now you say that you listened to spirituals. Who did you listen to? How did they enter into your aura?
Yeah, you know, they entered not as religion, but as culture. You know, as part of, you know, I you know, have chaired and teach African American studies. You know, my day job, what I do all day long is talk about and teach and spread the gospel of black culture. And so some of that is the spirituals, some of that is Lucille Clifton, some of that is Romare Bearden, some of that is Frederick Douglass. You know, I bring it all together in that way in my life. And so in that regard, it was one of many deeply culturally resonant texts, but that had a new meaning in this moment of grief. You're welcome. You're welcome. Yes?
It's a technique question.
Mm-hmm.
How did you decide the order in which you brought up certain stories? How did you decide on the order in which you mentioned?
Some of it was just the kind of intuition of being in the process, but I knew two things when I started making order out of it all. I knew that I wanted to tell the terrible what happened up front, because I thought, well, that's why we're here, because this beautiful man died suddenly. And because I'm the kind of reader, as a reader of memoirs, like I'll go find it in the book. And, you know, so I thought, well, I want people to read the book the way that I want them to read it. So I did that first, and then I knew that the next section had to be, why should you love these people? And so the second section of the book is about meeting, falling in love, making a family, building a family. And then it goes back in time or forward in time in the third section. In the first section, basically like we've been introduced, he's passed away. The second section, falling in love. The third section, okay, what are the days that follow? What are the weeks that follow? And there's that continual sort of moving back and forth in the way that I think we sort of experience our day-to-day. We're not always just in this moment. Memory comes in, association comes in. So I wanted to see if I could make that happen in the book as well. Yes.
You spoke in the beginning about how you wrote this in poet's prose, which I thought was so interesting. So is that in the brevity? Is that in the rhythm? What creates that style for you for this one?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One is not starting with a word or a phrase or a sound, and not necessarily knowing where it's going to go. So not starting saying, now I'm going to tell this part of the story, but starting with images and little Henry Ford's last breath. That's a good example. I didn't know where that was going. I just knew in that way that as poets, it's like, how come I know that? Like, why is it floating around in there? But it seems relevant now. And then the beauty of the writing is you think, oh, this is why. And the writing takes you there. So I think there's that, and also, it's quite condensed. So there's no chapter that's more than a few pages long. And it is, there are, not that this can't happen in prose, but there are leaps in time and leaps in narrative. So not every bit of connective tissue is there, which I think is one of the wonderful privileges I feel when I'm writing poetry, is that you can jump over the stones in that way.
Love it.
Yeah. Yes.
What would you say to one or either of your sons if they came to you and said they wanted to be a writer?
Well, actually, Simon, the younger, who I describe as being of indeterminate creativity, he's just a very interesting child. And so he's very funny. And I said to him one time, I said, oh, you're so funny, you could be a comedy writer. And he drew himself up and he said, or I could be a novelist. So I said, okay, baby, yes, you could. Let me not, So who knows? I don't know. But I mean, what would I would say, work really hard and make sure you get a job. Maybe if there's anyone else who hasn't asked a question, and then if not, you're the last question.
Okay. Can you verbalize the difference in how it feels when you're writing it and when you're reading it out loud, whether to strangers or your sons, the difference between writing and reading it out loud?
Well, there's always a stage in the process of any kind of writing for me where I read it out loud. And actually, I never used to share my poetry with anyone but Ficre, and he shared every line he ever made with me. And we had a ritual, which is that I would read it to him, and then he would read it back to me, because in hearing it out, I could always hear, oh God, there's a hitch there, and that was always such a gift. And then with the poem, he would say, and it was cute because he did not grew up in this country, so he would give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, which is, I think, such an American gesture. But he could go like this if it was good, but he'd go like that if it was bad. And then I'd come back with draft after draft, and he was really serious. It could happen 100 times. Like, I'm really sorry, just like thumbs down. Sorry, but it was always in that process of hearing it, both in my own voice and in his, that I could find things and repair them. So that is a part of my reading it to myself, is a part of the writing process before it's published. What's interesting, I find, about reading poems out loud is that I feel that they are outside of me. They're kind of like sending out. They don't belong to me anymore, although I made them. So sometimes I'll read a poem and I'll actually think, like, that's really good. That sounds really good, because it's done. It's out. It's finished. It's not my flesh anymore. This is a little different, but again, the process is just beginning. I mean, it came out a week and a half ago. So I think sometimes I get a little bit tripped up about the story of it. But what's also interesting is that, as with any work of art, the writing has to convince. So this is my story, this is my life, this is my husband, these are my children. But also, this is a family, this is a beautiful man, this is a mother and her kids. You know, these are also characters, even though every word is true. So that's what I would say about what's really kind of interesting and a little bit different from anything I've experienced about this book. Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, oh, look at these flowers. They're so beautiful. Thank you.
Folks, if there are no more questions, then we have The Light of the World, as well as several of Professor Alexander's previous titles for sale at the counter in the front room over there. She's going to be signing over here at the table to the left of the podium. I want to thank our guest introducer, Campbell McGrath, and you don't need me to tell you that was one of the loveliest readings we've had here in quite a while. Please give another hand to
Thank you.
Elizabeth Alexander.
Thank